Imagine a massive ancient Joshua tree standing in the desert for centuries. 7 years ago, it became more than just a landmark. It became a grave. One summer night, lightning split the tree open, revealing two skeletons locked in a final embrace. The mystery of two missing tourists was solved, but the real shock was who had been with them all along. A man meant to protect them. This is the story of Rachel and John, whose dream trip ended in horror, hidden inside a tree for 7 years, until a storm forced the truth into the light. The tale commenced in 2010. Rachel and John were the sort of couple who seemed to embody happiness. She was 26, he was 28. She, a photographer captivated by light and texture. He, an aspiring writer seeking tales beyond the pages of books. To cover their mundane office jobs in Los Angeles, they worked tirelessly. Yet, they lived for the weekends and holidays, escaping to wherever their gazes led them. Their common interest was nature, raw and untamed. They had journeyed to nearly every West Coast national park, and now Joshua Tree was on their agenda. For Rachel, it was a long-cherished dream. She had spent weeks poring over maps and researching the golden hour when the sun tinted the rocks with surreal hues. Her ambition was to capture a series of photographs that she believed would ignite her career as a photographer. In typical fashion, John aided her, purchasing new hiking boots and several journals with the intention of penning a travelogue about their upcoming expedition. This journey was intended to be unique. Their itinerary consisted of a 3-day stay within the park, residing at a humble motel in 29 Palms. On the morning of June 18th, they communicated their final messages to their parents. "We've arrived, incredible, love you, kisses, speak to you Sunday night." This was the last communication anyone received from them. Upon arrival at the motel, they left some possessions behind and drove their old Toyota to the park. The motel manager reported that they were in good spirits, laughing and inquiring about the best coffee shop in town. John provided his mother's phone number at the front desk as a precaution. A mere formality, he claimed. They intended to traverse one of the most frequented paths, the trail to Skull Rock, before venturing to explore nearby boulders and Joshua Tree groves. They packed a backpack with water, a small meal, and undoubtedly Rachel's camera for a leisurely walk through the park to appreciate the scenery and photograph sunset. However, by Sunday evening, neither Rachel nor John had contacted their families. Initially, it was not a cause for concern due to the signal issues in the park, but when their phones remained out of range even on Monday, anxiety set in. John's mother phoned the motel. The manager verified the couple had neither returned nor checked out. Their possessions were still undisturbed. On Monday evening, park rangers initiated a search. The initial discovery was their vehicle. The Toyota was parked at Skull Rock Trailhead. The doors were secured. On the passenger seat lay a park guidebook with a marked page. Inside the glove compartment, they found John's wallet containing money and ID, his notebook, and multiple pens. Appeared as if they departed for a stroll, seemingly on their way back. Oddly enough, when individuals disappear typically, their belongings like documents and money are taken along. This scenario lacked any indications of burglary or strife. They had inexplicably disappeared. A massive search operation was initiated. For the initial few days, hordes of volunteers and multiple rangers scoured the region, walking side by side, meticulously inspecting every stone and crevice. Helicopters hovered above, employing thermal imaging cameras in an attempt to detect warmth of human bodies, contrasting against the chilly desert night backdrop. Handlers with search dogs attempted to trace a scent, but were unsuccessful. The dogs seemed agitated, constantly circling the parking lot before losing interest. It was as if the trail ended abruptly at the car. The heat was stifling. During the day, the temperature exceeded 40 degrees Celsius. In those conditions without water, a person can live for at most a day. However, Rachel and John, seasoned explorers, were well versed in the rules. Equipped with a backpack containing water, they should have left some sign even if they strayed off course. But nothing was found. Absolutely nothing. No trace, no fragment of fabric, no drop of blood. The search area was broadened repeatedly over vast expanses of desert. Skilled mountaineers descended into the deepest canyons. Survival analysts attempted to predict their behavior if they got lost. Every possibility was meticulously considered. Accident, animal attack, dehydration, all were investigated thoroughly. Yet none of these hypotheses could be substantiated. Cougars were scarcely found in the area and rarely attacked adults. Snakes could be harmful, but it seemed implausible that two individuals would vanish after being bitten by one. A seasoned ranger named David Wallace was spearheading the on-site search efforts. Around 45 years old, with a face etched by weather and eyes that bore quiet confidence, he had spent over 2 decades navigating Joshua Tree Park. He became the voice to the media, delivering delicate yet compassionate statements about the missing couple. Privately addressing the bereaved parents, he reassured them of every possible and impossible effort being expended. His demeanor exuded both professionalism and empathy. David appeared deeply committed to the search, frequently extending his work into the night, managing volunteers, and personally scouring challenging terrain. In every interview, he repeated, "The desert can guard its mysteries. Sometimes it takes people, leaving us ignorant of how or why." His statement echoed a somber yet insightful understanding of the unforgiving truth. No one had foreseen that he was the writer of this mystery of the desert. Time progressed, replacing the intense search with periodic excursions by small teams. Volunteers departed, the media lost focus. Rachel and John's story transformed into one of the countless unresolved mysteries within the national parks. Parents enlisted private investigators, yet they too found nothing. The case was labeled cold. The official account stated missing, presumed deceased, due to a wilderness accident. However, families refused to accept it. They couldn't stomach the lack of bodies. The absence of answers proved more unsettling than any grim reality. Years elapsed. The narrative evolved into a local folklore, a chilling tale shared around campfires to novice travelers about a pair from Los Angeles who vanished in the desert. No one expected to gain insight ever again. 7 years of unbroken, oppressive silence. 7 years of void and doubt. One sweltering July night in 2017, a lightning bolt cleaved the sky over Joshua Tree Park. A tree far from the beaten tourist path was struck, near where John and Rachel's car had vanished. The venerable tree, guarding its mystery for 7 long years, uttered its secret. As dawn broke the following day, an inexperienced ranger patrolling an infrequently used route discovered the fractured tree. Although such sights were not unusual after a storm, the magnitude of destruction piqued his curiosity. The trunk had been cleaved from top to bottom. Upon closer inspection, he perceived anomalous white shapes within the hollow trunk. Initially, he believed they were roots, or perhaps the remains of some large creature that had sought shelter and perished. He illuminated the interior with his flashlight, and at that instant, his blood ran chilly. They weren't roots. Instead, they appeared to be a human hand. Finger bones entwined with another hand's. Above lay 2 compressed skulls. Below, a young ranger retched on parched earth. He nervously keyed the radio, contacting the sheriff and his superior, Senior Ranger David Wallace, the same David from 7 years past who had led the search. In seconds, news of the grisly find swept through. Once more, the Rachel and John case resurfaced in headlines. The area was cordoned off. San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office, forensic experts and investigators arrived. The job was painstaking. The timber was brittle, and careful extraction of the remains to avoid damage or contamination was nearly a jeweler's task. Experts had to cut portions of the trunk for access to the hollow. Each action was deliberate and cautious. The sight within stunned even seasoned crime scene investigators. The corpses were positioned as if intentionally placed within this natural burial site. They lay facing each other, their hands entwined. This was not the posture one would adopt in search of shelter. It conveyed intimacy, but it was a tableau arranged by an unknown, cruel hand. Near the skeletons, remnants of decaying clothing and scraps of leather that once made up a backpack were found. Inside this backpack, remarkably preserved within the thick material, was Rachel's camera. Identification was swift. A comparison of dental records verified what everyone had already suspected. The remains were those of Rachel and John. 7 years of torment for their families ended with this revelation. However, one question arose to replace another, more chilling. How did they end up there? The initial hypothesis, which certain media outlets had hastily proposed as the couple seeking shelter from the weather only to become trapped, was swiftly debunked. Initially assessing the tree, specialists identified that prior to the lightning strike, the sole access point into the cavity stood approximately 3 meters tall, making it inconvenient for two grown individuals to enter, especially in a state of distress. Upon initial bone examination by forensic experts, they discovered injuries seemingly predating death. A minor indentation was found on John's cranium, suggesting trauma from a blunt object. Rachel displayed several fractured ribs, likely sustained during her life. The case transitioned from a missing persons investigation to a double homicide probe. Detective Miles Miller took charge, a detail-oriented and persistent individual with no prior ties to the initial investigation or the county. He began his work anew, scrutinizing 7-year-old files, search records, interview transcripts, and maps of the region. Initially, he interviewed everyone associated with the initial investigation, among them being David Wallace. The seasoned ranger appeared weary, but maintained the composed and measured demeanor he exhibited 7 years prior during his interview. He expressed relief that the bodies had been located, allowing the families to bury their children. He shared the extensive nature of the search operation, detailing how every square inch of the park was meticulously scoured. "We searched extensively, Detective," David stated, addressing Miller directly. "Yet we were searching for signs of life or physical remains on the surface. Nobody would have considered searching within the trees. This is the doing of a beast, not nature." Miller attentively listened, nodding occasionally, but the ranger's behavior raised his suspicions. There seemed to be an air of performance about him, suggesting he had rehearsed his words. His calmness was out of place for one whose jurisdiction had been the site of such a gruesome murder. Miller chose to delve further. Initially, he scrutinized the June 2010 patrol logs. On surface, everything appeared normal. The day the couple vanished, David Wallace was assigned to the southern part of the park, significantly distant from Skull Rock's trail. However, a minor inconsistency caught Miller's eye. The patrol entry from that day was penned in a handwriting dissimilar to David's other entries for that month. Upon asking Wallace about it, he casually responded that they occasionally get the station attendant to log the data if they return late. While reasonable, this response prompted Miller to make a notation. He subsequently conversed with other rangers who were on duty at the time. Most portrayed Wallace as a stern yet fair supervisor, deeply passionate about his job. However, one ex-ranger who had resigned a few years back recollected something intriguing. He mentioned that Wallace held an almost fanatical fascination for the park. He disliked it immensely when tourists deviated from the trails or discarded waste, often reprimanding them sternly for trivial matters. He viewed the park as his private estate. However, a significant revelation occurred when forensic analysts examined Rachel's camera. The memory card was impaired by moisture, but data recovery experts were able to retrieve the final images. Most of the photos matched expectations. Breathtaking desert vistas, sun-drenched rocks, cheerful selfies of Rachel and John. But the last photo was peculiar. It appeared hastily taken, blurry, only revealing a portion of a male figure in a ranger uniform from behind. The face was obscured, but the uniform was undeniably identifiable. By itself, an image of a ranger in a national park held no significance, yet it did suggest that in their final moments the couple had interacted with a ranger. Detective Miller chose to examine all potential links between the victims and park personnel. He initiated an analysis of their social media profiles, old blogs, and emails. It was during this process that he discovered something significant which altered the entire direction of the investigation. Approximately 6 months prior to her disappearance, Rachel had visited Joshua Tree National Park by herself for a 2-day photo shoot. She maintained a small photo blog, and in one of her posts about this trip, she praised an exceptionally helpful senior ranger who showed her hidden vantage points for photography. She even uploaded a picture of him, a grainy shot of a man in a hat amidst rocks. Although his face was barely discernible, it was him, David Wallace. She affectionately referred to him as the guardian of the desert. This post served as the first connection, Subsequently, IT experts, having accessed Rachel's email archives, found multiple emails received from an unidentified email address following that trip. The letter writer held her in high regard for her skill and attractiveness, commenting that she differed from typical tourists. He professed a unique bond with her and anticipated her return. Rachel politely acknowledged the initial letter and disregarded subsequent ones. Investigators quickly determined the sender's IP address, discovering that all letters originated from a computer within the Joshua Tree National Park Rangers central office. At the time, only park rangers on duty and the senior ranger had access to this machine. The puzzle pieces started falling into place. Wallace, solitary, engrossed in his work in the park, encountered Rachel. In his distorted thoughts, her affection for nature and courteous reply morphed into something deeper. He became fixated on her. He yearned for her return, and when she did, accompanied by her boyfriend, joyful and in love, his world crumbled. His admiration transformed into wrath and jealousy. He felt betrayed and deceived. Detective Miller became convinced that David Wallace was the culprit, requiring definitive physical proof beyond a motive alone. He scrutinized the forensic team's report on the examined tree trunk multiple times, uncovering a detail initially missed. In the decayed remnants of clothing and bones, a minute fragment of blue nylon fiber, nearly microscopic, was discovered. This type of fiber did not align with Rachel's or John's wardrobe, instead appearing foreign. Armed with this warrant, Miller searched David Wallace's home, office locker, and vehicle. Initially, the search revealed no evidence. However, in the garage, hidden within an old metal box filled with camping equipment that David claimed he hadn't utilized in years, the detective found what he sought. It was an aged blue nylon climbing rope, robust and thick. Examination confirmed that the fiber discovered among the remains matched the fibers of this rope, likely employed by the culprit to lower the corpses into the cavitated tree trunk. With motive, chance, and tangible evidence connecting David Wallace to the concealed body's location, Miller possessed all necessary elements. He climbed into his vehicle, deposited the case file on the passenger seat, and navigated towards the ranger's office. The conversational phase had concluded. David Wallace was in his office when Detective Miller, unannounced, entered. The park ranger was seated at his desk, scrutinizing a map of the park much as he had countless times previously. His face bore no signs of surprise or anxiety, merely a man performing his duties. Miller approached the desk and silently set down two closed plastic bags before him. One contained a minuscule blue nylon hair, the other a photograph of an aged climbing rope within a metal box. David glanced at the bags, then reciprocated with a gaze towards Miller. Briefly, something seemed to flicker in his eyes, only for a brief instant. The veneer of David's unyielding professionalism showed faint signs of fissure. He remained silent, yet the small office seemed to fill with an audible quietude, punctuated only by the static on his radio belt. "We retrieved the images from her camera, David," Miller said in a hushed tone, "and we read the letters, the ones you wrote her following her inaugural journey." "The detective didn't ask," he announced. Gradually, David leaned back in his chair, paling visibly. He had kept this secret close for 7 long years, bearing it as an additional layer of skin. He believed the desert would never relinquish its hold, yet he underestimated one aspect, the zipper. Now, everything was at an end. For a prolonged period, David gazed fixedly at the wall behind Miller. Eventually he spoke. His voice was steady, devoid of emotion, as if reciting a police report. He started narrating his tale. He recounted their first meeting, when Rachel had come alone. He said she was distinct from others. She viewed the park through his perspective, discerning more than just attractive landscapes. He guided her to places he had never shared before. In his troubled mind, an unparalleled bond was forged between them, which he deemed inviolable. He eagerly awaited her return. Upon her 6-month absence, his spirits soared. Upon spotting her car in the parking lot, he rushed to the trail to serendipitously encounter her. However, upon observing that she wasn't alone, disappointment and anger surged within him. To his mind, John was merely an intrusive tourist who lacked value compared to Rachel or his cherished park. He felt it disrespected by his presence. These feelings of envy and wrath congealed into a volatile brew. Approaching them as they exited the trail for photo opportunities, he initially issued a formal warning about prohibited areas. John responded defensively, asserting that he shouldn't mar their holiday. Words tumbled into words and a quarrel erupted. As David claimed, John had been the first to shove him. Then he lost self-control. Nearby, a stone lay waiting. He grabbed it, striking John on the head. John collapsed silently. Rachel let out a piercing cry, one of shock and dismay. David felt compelled to halt that cry, to preserve the tranquility of his park. He covered her mouth with his hand, restraining her until she ceased resisting. It unfolded within just a few minutes. Alone once more, he stood amidst the desert, flanking two lifeless forms. No fear gripped him. Years as a ranger had instilled in him how to respond in an emergency. He was on familiar ground. He knew his actions. He moved the bodies off the trail into dense foliage. He awaited nightfall. He recognized that ancient tree. He had observed it long ago. He knew it housed a void inside, a suitable resting place, one that would never be discovered. At dusk, he retraced his steps to his car, retrieved an aged climbing rope, and revisited the corpses. Systematically, he lowered them into the abyssal compartment within the trunk. He arranged them nose to nose and bound their wrists together, a final, macabre act of defiance. He planned to leave Rachel in his park for all eternity, but not by herself. Then, he restored order in the couple's car, ensuring it looked as if they had merely gone on a hike and departed. The following day, when they declared them missing, he offered to spearhead the search, an ingenious maneuver. No one would suspect the man who appeared to be searching most fervently. He steered volunteers astray, veering them from the actual location. He feigned sorrow in interviews. For 7 years, he maintained a double existence. During daylight hours, he was a respected senior ranger, protector of the park. In the dark, he was a murderer who occasionally stood beneath that very tree without uttering a word. On that same day, David Wallace was apprehended in his office without resistance. At the trial, he remained silent, fixing his gaze on a single point. He was given 2 sentences of life imprisonment without the prospect of parole. 7 years later, Rachel and John's families found solace in burying them. However, they never received answers to the haunting question, why? After 7 years, Joshua's tree, divided by lightning, and his tomb for the same duration, was meticulously felled and relocated from the park. In its stead, new sprouts started emerging. The desert carried on with life, concealing a fresh, previously unseen secret that surpassed anyone's expectations.